Hello, I'm Nathan P. Butler, author of a Saga on home video and host from the Star Wars Home Video Library here on YouTube, and this is Star Wars Home Video Year by Year. This time we take a look at 1996. And yeah, that means we are concluding a second decade of coverage here on the series. We covered 1977 through 1986, that's one decade. Now we've covered 87 all the way up to 96. That's 2 decades of Star Wars Home Video that we've taken a look at. And we're still looking at stuff like VHS at this point. We have a long way to go to reach the present. 1996 was an interesting year for Star Wars in general. It is the year of the launch of StarWars.com, right? The official Star Wars website, which will go through a lot of permutations to get to where it is today. It is also the year that we saw the launch of the Nintendo 64, and alongside it, Shadows of the Empire, which was a video game that also grew into this massive multimedia project as they were developing it to include a novel and comics and toys and so on and so on. So a big year for Star Wars. Shadows of the Empire probably the biggest thing coming out of 1996. Home video wise, things are pretty quiet. It is sort of the calm before the storm, or perhaps the eye of the storm, because the previous year, 95, tons of stuff relating to the THX Remastered Edition, which of course was a more broad release of what had been the Definitive Collection remastering back in 93. Next year, 1997, the special editions hit theaters and home video. It is enormous. This year, there's really only one release to speak of out of the US, but it's a pretty interesting one, and one that maybe a lot of Star Wars home video collectors don't have in their collection because it is a home video item as part of something that is, in and of itself, a little broader than just home video. That is this. Star Wars the Interactive Board Game, also known as Assault on the Death Star if you're looking at the name of the story. This is basically a board game. I think I have the cover on upside down, so there's what you see on the back with a little bit about how it lays out. If you want to see a lot more detail on this, see episode 63 from the Star Wars Home Video Library, where I go into this in depth. It includes a VHS cassette that simply says Star Wars Interactive Video Board Game. And basically what this is it's a board game. You got all your components here, right? You got cards, you got a board with all kinds of nifty stuff on it, your different meeples and tokens and stuff like that. Basically, the story is that you are rebels who are invading the Death Star, and it's basically trying to complete your mission before Darth Vader can hunt you down. And in the process, the VHS cassette acts basically as a timer. You're watching it as you play, and a lot of times it's just a screen with a timer type thing on it. But then eventually, nope, it switches and Vader or Vader and another Imperial come on screen, and Vader might talk directly to you as the players, telling you what to do. And along the way, one of the characters, long before we had the secret apprentice of Galen Merrick / Starkiller in Legends, or Ahsoka Tano in Legends and Canon, long before Vader had those apprentices, one of these characters can be turned into a secret apprentice of Vader by the time the game is over, depending on how long you take to play. It was an interesting way of integrating VHS media into a board game. And you see some examples of this back in the 80s and 90s, but a lot of what you would see back then is stuff where the VHS was sort of just providing information, and a lot of times it was like trivia-based stuff. For example, there was a Disney one where, you'd watch clips of Disney cartoon films and then answer questions about them. I remember fondly Commercial Crazies, where you'd literally watch a commercial and then you had different levels of difficulty questions, I believe it was, to answer about the commercial. Like, the commercial might be a FedEx commercial with the fast-talking guy from Micro Machines commercials, and instead of asking about what was said about the product, maybe it's like, what was the time on the clock on the wall, or something bizarre like that. It's very sort of a take in the details type of game. But this took it up a notch because the board game aspect really was an actual board game to go along with the VHS. The VHS simply was a driving force of it, but it cannot be played without the VHS cassette, unless, of course, you check out, say, a digitized version of it. I'm sure there's something like that already on YouTube at this point. But if you want to see more about it, check out From the Star Wars Home Video Library, episode number 63. It's a unique, weird little thing here in this gap between the THX Remastered Edition, the original, One Last Time, and the special editions, See It Again for the First Time. This was more like See It While You Play, or something of the kind. What is really interesting about this, though, is that the footage with Vader, sometimes it's repurposed footage from A New Hope, very much like we would eventually see with some repurposed footage in, say, Rogue One. But this also had new stuff shot with director of photography Gilbert Taylor back again. And in the stuff that is being reshot, Vader is actually portrayed voice-wise by James Earl Jones and in body by Dave Prowse. And it is not the first time that we've actually seen new Star Wars live-action stuff shot for something since, you know, the original trilogy ended and the Ewok stuff ended. That was Rebel Assault 2, but this is a very prominent example of it, using beloved known characters, in this case Vader, and still an early example of that sort of thing. I would also note, and I have to actually look up the information in my own A Saga on Home video for this here, Volume 3, that eventually this story was wrapped into the Dark Forces Saga. That was basically a series of articles by Abel Pena for Wizards of the Coast, and this story was assumed to be the story of a rebel team that included Kyle Katarn, Shira Bree, later known as Dark Lady Lumaya, Corwin Shelvey, and Erling Treadway, all trying to make their way onto the Death Star and complete their mission. So, as weird as this is, it actually is within continuity, with some smoothing over for the Legends continuity, for those who care. It's not the last time that Star Wars home video and board games would come together. We'll actually see a Trivial Pursuit Saga edition later that brings Trivial Pursuit and Star Wars Questions on DVD together as a home video item, kind of. But this was a really interesting game for its time, though certainly an oddball. What's not odd and completely expected is the barrage of new releases that we would get with the Star Wars Trilogy Special Edition. So join us next time as we start taking a look at those in 1997.